now that we have worked a little bit with linear equations, we're now going to bring fractions into the mix and see different kinds of linear equations and different kinds of methods and how to solve linear equations when we have fractions. So looking at example 1, we have a over 10 equals 20. So for this linear equation, right, for any linear equation, we want to get the variable on its own. In this case, we want to get a on its own. And since 10 is being divided by a, in order to get a on its own, we're just simply going to multiply 10 to both sides of this equation, because if we write 10 as a fraction, we can write it as 10 over 1, and these 10s cancel out, and we just get a over 1 equals 20 times 10 equals 200. And a divided by 1, well, that's just a. So we just get a equals 200. And that's it. For example 2, we have 4 over x plus 4 equals 7. I encourage you to pause the video and try this one on your own. And assuming you have gone through it, let's go through it together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides. So I'm going to get 4 over x equals 7 minus 4 is 3. And then here at this point, we have x in the denominator. And anytime a variable is in the denominator, we want to get it out of there because we don't like variables in the denominator. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to multiply x on both sides. So these x's cancel, and you get 4 equals 3x. And then here, or from here, to solve for x, we just simply divide both sides by 3, and we get x equals 4/3. That's your answer. Looking at problem number 3, I encourage you to pause the video and try this one on your own. And also try number 4 on your own as well. And assuming you have tried both these example problems on your own, let's go through it. So for problem number 3, the first thing I want to do is convert this mixed number here, 2 1/2, to an improper fraction. So I'm going to multiply 2 times 2, which is 4, and then add 4 to 1. So 4 plus 1, that's 5. So we get 5/2 equals x over 3. Now at this point, I want to get x on its own. So I'm going to multiply by 3 on both sides. So these 3's cancel. And here, if I put 3 over 1, and if I try to cross reduce, 3 and 2, I can't cross reduce that. 1 and 5 also can't cross reduce. So we're just going to simply multiply across. So 3 times 5 and 1 times 2. 3 times 5 is 15. 1 times 2 is 2. And then here, those 3's canceled. So we're just left with x, and x equals 15/2. Now looking at example 4, we have a over 13 plus 7 equals 5. Now in the denominator there, we have 13 plus 7, and they are like terms. So I'm going to go ahead and add 13 and 7, which we get a over 20 equals 5. And now to get a on its own, I'm going to multiply 20 on both sides because 20 is being divided by a. So we get a equals 20 times 5, well, that's 100. And that's your final answer. Looking at example number 5, I encourage you to pause the video and try this one on your own. And now let's go through it together. So this one might look scary because we have 3 fractions. However, notice all these fractions have the same denominator of 5. So since they all have the same denominator, we can make our lives really easy and multiply this whole equation by 5. Because when we distribute in this 5 to all these fractions, what happens is all the denominators cancel out. So what all we're left with is 1 equals 2, oops, not 2/5. all we're left with is 1 equals 2x minus 1. And then we solve this like all the other linear equations we've seen before. So I'm going to add 1 on both sides, and we get 2 equals 2x, and then I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides. So we get x equals 1. Looking at example number 6, we have 2/3 equals 5/4 multiplied by 2/5 plus x. Now for this problem, my first step is going to be to distribute this 5/4 into both terms. So we're going to get 2/3 equals 5 times 2 is 10, and 4 times 5 is 20. And then plus 5/4 x. Now here, 10/20ths, I can reduce this, and I can divide both 10 and 20 by 10. So 10 divided by 10 is just 1, and 20 divided by 10 is just 2. So this fraction can reduce to 1/2. Now, to solve this equation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 1/2 on both sides. So we're going to these cancel, and we get 2/3 minus 1/2 equals 5/4 x. Now, to subtract these fractions, we have to find a common denominator, and our common denominator is 6. So, to get 3 to 6, I'm going to have to multiply this whole fraction by 2. And to get 2 to 6, I'm going to need to multiply this whole fraction by 3. So what we're going to get, 2 times 2 is 4. And now I should write it like this, 2 over 2 times 3 over 3. My apologies. So 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. So we're going to get 4, 6 minus 1 times 3 is 3. 2 times 3 is 6. That's going to be equal to 5/4 x. Now that our denominators are the same here, I can go ahead and subtract our numerators. So we're going to get 4 minus 3. 4 minus 3 is 1. So we're going to get 1/6 equals 5/4 x. Now, to solve for x, because this 5/4 is being multiplied by x, I'm going to divide the fraction. I'm going to divide both sides by 5/4. Now, I'm going to show you all a trick. So recall when you divide fractions, there's this rule called keep, change, flip. So when if I were to divide both sides of this equation by 5/4, notice what happens. We're going to get, this is going to cancel. We're going to get x equals, we're going to keep the first fraction as it is, 1/6, change that division to multiplication, and then we're going to flip the second fraction. So the 5/4 now becomes 4/5. Now, if you wanted to do a little bit of a shortcut, what you could have done here instead, so I'm going to erase this part. What you can do instead is recognize that when you divide fractions, what ends up happening is you just end up multiplying what's called the reciprocal. You just end up flipping the fraction. So what a lot of people do in this case is they will say just multiply both sides by the reciprocal of whatever's being multiplied by x. So I can just multiply both sides of this equation by 4/5. Because when we divide both sides, that's what we're doing, is we're essentially multiplying both sides by 4/5. So what happens? These 4's cancel, these 5's cancel, and you're just left with x equals 1/6 times 4/5. Notice you get the same thing. So you can use whatever method you'd like. Both methods get you to the same answer because we're essentially doing the same thing. So some people prefer just to multiply this whole equation by the reciprocal of the fraction that's being multiplied by x. Some people like to just some people just like to divide both sides by 5/4 and end up flipping the fraction, but notice we end up getting the same thing regardless. So let's do this. So notice here, the 6 and this 4, they're both even, so I can cross reduce, and I can divide both by 2. So 6 divided by 2, that's 3. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So I'm going to get x equals 1 times 2, which is 2, and 3 times 5, which is 15. And 2 and 15, they're not divisible by a common factor, so I can't reduce this fraction. So this is your final answer. Looking at example 7, we have 1/7 n plus 10/7 plus 1/2 n equals 3/2. So for this problem, one thing I do want to point out here, notice that we have two different denominators. We have two denominators that have 7, and we have two denominators that have 2. So when this happens, we can make our lives fairly easy. And what we can do is find the least common denominator. Now, what would our least common denominator be in this case? Well, it just happens to be 7 times 2, our two different denominators. We multiply them 2 together, and what we get, 7 times 2 is 14. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, it just so happens if we multiply this whole equation by our least common denominator, which is 14, all of these fractions will cancel out, and then we'll solve it like a linear equation without fractions. So let's see what this looks like in play. Now, one thing I do want to point out is because we're multiplying this whole equation by 14, so we're going to have to distribute this 14 into the 1/7. So it's going to look like this. We're going to have to distribute it into here, to here, to here, and to here. We're going to need to distribute that 14 to all of our terms. So let's do that. So we're going to have 1/7 n times 14 plus 10/7 times 14 plus 1/2 n times 14 equals 3/2. 3/2 times 14. Now, here is the important part. So notice, for this first term here, we have a 7 in the denominator, and this 14, if it helps, you can write this as 14/1. And notice, remember, when we multiply fractions, we can do something called cross-reducing. So in the 7 and 14, we can cross-reduce that. We can divide both 7 and 14 by 7. So if I divide 7 by 7, we get 1, and then 14 divided by 7 is 2. So looking at this here, we're going to get 1 times 2 and 1 times 1. So I'm going to write that term here. We're going to have 2/1. 2/1 and 2/1 is just 2, because 2 divided by 1 is just 2. So I'm going to keep it as 2. And then we can't forget this n that is here. So we're going to have 2n. Oops, not 2, only 2. 2n. Now looking at this second term here, we can also cross-reduce. I'm going to put this as 14/1 we can write this as 14/1. And notice that the 7 and 14, they cross-reduce. So I'm going to do that. 7 divided by 7 is 1, and 14 divided by 7 is 2. And this 10 and 1, I can't cross-reduce that. So we're going to do 10 times 2 and 1 times 1. 10 times 2, that's 20. And then 20 divided by 1 is just 20. So we're just going to leave it as plus 20. Now for these last two terms, I encourage you to pause the video and cross-reduce both these terms like we've done before, and resume the video when you are done. And assuming you have cross-reduced and simplified the terms, let's go through it. So we have 1/2 n times 14. I'm not going to write this 14/1 anymore, so that way we can start getting used to it. But you can also write it as 14/1 if you would like, if that makes it easier for you. But I'm going to cross-reduce this. So I can divide both 14 and 2 by 2. So 2 divided by 2, that's 1. 14 divided by 2 is 7. So what do I get? we get 1 times 7, which is 7, and then 1 times this invisible 1 that we'd have. So we're going to get 1 times 7, which is 7, and then we can't forget that n. So we have a plus 7n. Then I'm going to carry down this equal sign, and then we have 3 halves times 14. If I cross reduce, 2 divided by 2 is 1. 14 divided by 2 is 7. So we get 3 times 7, which is 21. And now that we have this linear equation at this point, I encourage you to pause the video and solve for n from here. And assuming you have solved for n, let's go through it. So I can combine these like terms, 2n and 7n. So 2 plus 7 is 9. So we're going to get 9n plus 20 equals 21. Now to solve for n, I'm going to subtract 20 on both sides. So these 20s cancel. We get 9n equals 1. And then our last step is to divide by 9 on both sides. So we get, oops, not x. Our variable is n. We get n equals 1/9. And that's your final answer. Now looking at example 8, we are going to use the same exact process as we used for example number 7, where we first find our least common denominator, multiply the whole equation by our least common denominator, so all of our fractions cancel, and we get an equation similar to this. So knowing that, I encourage you to pause the video and try example 8 on your own. See if you understand this concept. And assume you have worked through it, let's go through it together. So for our least common denominator, we have 2 different kinds of denominators. We have 3 and 2. So I'm going to do 3 times 2, and our least common denominator is going to be 6. So, knowing that information, I'm going to multiply this whole equation by 6. Now, writing that out, we're going to have x over 3. I'll zoom in a little bit here so that we can see what I'm doing. We're going to have x over 3 times 6 minus 12 over 3 times 6 equals 17 times 6 minus 4x times 6 plus 1/2 x times 6. Now let's simplify. Here at this first term, we can cross-reduce this 3 and 6 because both are divisible by 3. 3 divided by 3, that's 1. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So here for this first term, I'm going to write it over here. We're going to get 2x. And in the second term here, we can also cross-reduce this 3 and 6. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So we get 12 times 2, which is 24. So 2x minus 24. And then we got to carry down this equal sign. And then 17 times 6, let me get my calculator here real quick. 17 times 6 is 102. Minus 4x times 6, which is 24x. And then for this last term here, we have 1/2 x times 6. And here we can also cross-reduce because the 2 and 6 are both divisible by 2. So I'm going to divide 2 by 2, which we're going to get 1. And the 6 becomes a 3. Now, if this idea of cross-reducing is a little bit confusing to you, I encourage you to go to the first unit and watch the video on multiplying and dividing fractions. Alrighty, so we have 1 times 3, which is 3, and then we got to carry down that x. So now from here, we're going to solve this equation like any other one we've seen before. So looking at the right-hand side of the equation, we can combine negative 24x and 3x. So let's do that. So we're going to have 2x minus 24 equals 102. And then negative 24 plus 3 is negative 21. So we're going to get negative 21x. And now from here, I'm going to add 21x on both sides of the equation. So this cancels, and we get 2 plus 21 is 23. X minus 24 equals 102. And now I can add 24 on both sides. And we get 23x equals 126. And now my final step to solve for x is to simply divide by 23 on both sides. So our final answer is x equals 126 over 23. And that's your final answer.